as a concept, circularity elevates resources to be useful rather than idle, so that we don't have to extract finite resources at the same scale and speed that we have been.
Welcome to The Future We Want, a podcast for rebellious leaders ready to get to work, do the work, and create the future we want. I'm Raphael, founding partner of BBMG, a branding and social impact agency that works with leaders that won't wait on things that can't wait.
Once consumers have experienced a fully circular proposition, they're not going to go back.
On today's episode, we speak with two great friends and colleagues working at the forefront of circular design to create new business models and delightful consumer experiences that design waste out of the equation. Kate Daly leads the Center for the Circular Economy at Closed Loop Partners, where she's helping accelerate the transition to a circular economy through collaborations like their consortium to reinvent the retail bag. John Atcheson is an entrepreneur who's piloted innovative circular retail platforms from the car-sharing company GetAround to the resale platform Stuffster, and now his newest venture, Circular Way. Kate and John help us see the possibilities for completely reimagining our relationship with the products we need and the things we want, so we can unlock more use, more value, and more joy. So welcome to the circular future we want. Let's get started. Hello, Kate. It is so exciting to see you, and welcome to the Future We Want podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to join you today.
As we dive in, I would love to set a little bit of context for why the conversation about circularity, why the conversation about design is so top of mind for us at BBMG and for many of our folks in our audience. As it relates to apparel, the Ellen MacArthur Foundation reported that less than 1% of all clothing is recycled. And what that means on a day-by-day basis is that the equivalent of a truckload of clothing is sent to landfill or burned every single second. When we think about our colleagues in the food business, and this is according to Feeding America, nearly 40% of all food in America is wasted. And to kind of picture what that even means, it's 119 billion pounds of food every year. That's the equivalent of 130 billion meals and over $400 billion of food that's just thrown away. On the hopeful side, BBMG and GlobeScan have been really looking at the differences generationally around people's values, their priorities, their relationship with brands, and in particular, their shopping behavior. And in the last year, we found, and this is a study of about 30,000 people in 30 different countries around the world, so a large study. And we found that 71% of Gen Z say that they are either very or extremely interested in buying products secondhand. That's 71%. And that is a 37% point difference between Gen Z and boomers, which is just profound if you look at a generation shift. Similarly, by a 40% difference, Gen Z says that they are either very or extremely interested in sharing products with others in the community. So on one hand, we see perhaps a business model or a broken system around the way that we create products, how we use them, and where they go. And on the other hand, we see this really interesting generational difference of young people saying, I believe in and I'm really hungry for a better way. Most of our listeners at BBMG are folks that are working in sustainability, they're working in marketing, they're working in product design. Circularity certainly is something we know of, but it would be great from your perspective, if you don't mind, to just kind of give us the circularity 101. What is circularity? And could you explain what it is in maybe the simple context of a human being's daily life?
Absolutely. I think, we have this tagline that circularity is the transition from a take, make, waste economy to one that is regenerative. But in your daily life, I feel like circularity is all around us. Every time we step outside and observe plants and wildlife, that's a successful circular cycle, obviously. If we pull food from the ground, prepare it, and then have nutrients left over, we should put those into compost to create the nutrients for future food. That's circularity. If I need to use a tool or a machine only once or twice a month or a year, I should borrow that rather than buy it. That's circularity. If I want a cup of coffee, it's the coffee that should be temporary, not the cup. The cup should be persistent and circular. And so really, as a concept, circularity elevates resources to be useful rather than idle, so that we don't have to extract finite resources at the same scale and speed that we have been. And it applies to every single area of our lives. It applies to our mobility, our consumption of clothing and entertainment, the way we move in space. Everything has the opportunity to be circular in the sense that there's opportunities for reuse, for borrowing, for sharing, and most of all for reduction, for eliminating what we don't need and turning to what we already have.
Right on. So you've shared a bit about how we might see circularity through the eyes of a person. I'm now curious, how might we see circularity through the eyes of a business? And you work with many of the great, retailers in the nation. You work with Target and Walmart and CVS and Walgreens and many grocery stores who are all trying to think about what this means for their business. So in the context of a business, what's the problem we're trying to solve? And ultimately, at Closed Loop Partners, what's the role you play in the mission that you offer to help solve it?
At Closed Loop Partners, we've been working to advance the circular economy for about 10 years now. And so over this past decade, we really have seen the state of the circular economy in the US in particular really change and advance over time. And those corporate retailer brand partners that you mentioned, they're at the table in the best possible way, in the sense that they're at the table with their competitors. They've seen they don't need to have a market differentiation around reducing waste, that can be a collaborative effort. And so I've been so impressed and grateful by the partners who have been willing to be so collaborative with their competitors in an area that is still sort of ambiguous and untested in certain ways. And so they've been on this journey together to identify, okay, what are the solutions that are really going to stick? I think that the opportunity ahead is businesses getting comfortable with experimentation, because systems change is not one lever that you push. It's a lot of different levers, and some of them don't work and some of them do. There is no one solution that can achieve waste reduction to achieve the goals that these brands and retailers have set. It's multiple solutions that are going to be needed. And to scale those diverse and new solutions is going to require a lot of testing and a lot of collaboration. And so the role of Closed Loop Partners and our Center for the Circular Economy is to lead that experimentation and collaboration with our brand partners. And so, we like to work at scale. As you know well, in our partnership with BBMG, we go in market, we test multi-brand interoperable reuse systems, whether it's food service packaging or the retail bag. And we see how much need there is for tweaking, for iteration, to make sure that you get the right environmental outcomes, and also that the new systems align with the operations of our partners and align with what customers are willing and able to participate in. And that's not to say we're not pushing outside the comfort zone. Of course we are, but there has to be a certain level of reality that's imposed on any of these new ideas. And we really see all of the data that we're collecting, all the insights we're collecting from all these in-market tests as really stepping stones to the next round of implementation that then leads to scale.
Exactly. And I think what you're underscoring is an appreciation for a couple things happening all at once. One is, businesses are really starting to innovate business models from take, make, and waste to a more circular system of use and reuse, and keeping things less idle, more useful over time, and keeping them in circulation to create more value for more people. So on one hand, you have a shift in a business model. The second is, as a consequence of that, designing new products and services that are meant to be refilled or reused or modular or rented instead of purchased. Like, all that's exciting in terms of innovation. And then the third part of this stool is the consumer behavior, which is both creating desire and aspiration and demand for more circular products and services and circular systems. So I'm curious on the consumer side. We've inherited a story that we have value because of the possessions that we own. It gives us a sense of identity, a sense of status, sometimes a sense of connection and belonging just by, identifying the things that we buy or material things that we purchase and possess. And I think that was certainly a story if you think about post-World War II and the rise of the consumer economy, the growth of the American middle class, and an advertising industry fueling that you were what you owned and what you have equals what your value and worth were. We're obviously experiencing the profound limitations of that story, and that the story of more has placed us at a cliff of planetary survival and species survival. And so we're curious, from what you're learning and what you're doing with your partners, what would you say is the new story that's emerging?
I love the framework of treating it as a story because we know how effective storytelling can be in really connecting people to complex ideas or overwhelming concepts for all of us. There's lots of studies that show that people are inspired by positivity and also by wanting to adhere to group norms. They're less influenced by shaming campaigns. And I think that what we've been looking at is how do we harness the positivity, the sort of creating the vision of what could be, of really looking at the way that a lot of us live that we're used to. It's not actually more convenient. It's not actually more beautiful. There are a lot of things that are really not great about the way that we live today. I always think of it in terms of aliens coming down and just looking at the lawn in America. In all of these areas that have droughts increasingly every summer, people have their sprinklers on their lawns. They put fertilizer on the lawn because they want the lawn to grow faster so that every week they can cut it. And just there's a lack of logic in the way that we live that, as you know, we've inherited it. And so it's very hard to think about it in a different way. And I think it's really important for circularity to become more culturally relevant. And the way that we can do that is in part to show its economic potential. I think a really good analogy is I would love for people to think about circular systems the same way they do about solar panels. Like, yes, it's great to have renewable energy and you get these long-term savings and you get this sort of independence potentially from the grid when you do that. And so it aligns with the individualistic nature of American culture. And at the same time, you're benefiting from and supporting renewable energy and reducing your reliance on fossil fuels. But many people do this not because they're thinking about the energy and fossil fuel systems, but rather because they can save money.
I'm curious, are there examples that you're seeing in your work that give you hope or that give you a sense of pride that we're making progress, that there's something happening that we can notice?
Yes, it's very gratifying to do this experimentation with our retail partners because we get to see in person these changes, and we get to speak directly to their customers and ask them not just what they think they might do in the future, but what are they doing right now? And that has been very inspiring. And so one example, of course, is the project that you and I collaborated on, the Beyond the Bag Consortium, which is looking to reinvent the retail bag. And we launched in-market pilots in Denver and Tucson this year to encourage people to bring their own bag. Right? The greenest bag is the one that you already own. And so let's make sure that we help you remember to bring it so that a single-use plastic bag isn't even part of the equation. And we were very excited to work with BBMG on that effort. And thanks to our partnership with you and so many local retailers in Denver and Tucson, we're now, as an outcome of that multi-month in-market intervention, projecting a reduction of 3 million single-use plastic bags in those cities, just as the outcome of that pilot. And there's so much more that we can do, but we're taking the learnings from that pilot and then applying them to our work toward a national cultural shift toward reuse that we're now advancing. And so that was so heartening and really promising.
You know, what I loved about the work and the insight that we had is how might we make, bringing your own bag as automatic as a behavior is when you leave the apartment or your house or get in the car from the garage, you have, okay, phone, wallet, keys, bag. And it just becomes part of the way that we think. Wherever we go, we're carrying those things around with us. And I'm so delighted to hear that it's had a materially positive impact on the communities where we're trying to tell a new story and invite people in. Again, do a behavior that works better, is smarter, is more gratifying, and that together we're making a really positive difference, and that is something that can scale. And props to you and the team and also all the retail partners who are willing to experiment together and learn together and try. And it was a huge effort, just the logistics of putting that together in just a couple markets across multiple organizations and retailers. And it's thrilling to know that it can make a difference. So congratulations. And that feels like an exciting story to tell and an emerging story we might all want to be part of. So as you think about the work around circularity, moving it from innovation and invention to scale, what's the most important things that businesses can do? And what's the most important thing that consumers can do?
I think that this is a critical time. Businesses are under so much pressure right now from regulation, from consumer demand, and it's really important that they're open to experimentation during this period where there is no one single solution that's going to solve all of this. And they need to be open to figuring things out together. And so it's collaboration that is the only path forward that then leads to individual success for these businesses. And for consumers, I think of consumers as citizens, and we need to act more in our long-term collective self-interest because our house is on fire and we need to work together to put it out. And I think that those two groups are intertwined and influence each other and create opportunities for each other, and we shouldn't forget that.
Yeah, amen. Thank you, Kate, so much. It's a delight to be together. And I'm so inspired by you and all the work that you and the team are doing. And you're showing us such a beautiful example of where we might go and what's possible. So thank you, Kate.
Thank you, Raphael. That's so wonderful to hear. And I think, for me, part of this is the ability to collaborate with like-minded people and to make that change in the world together.
Right on. Amen. And thank you, Kate.
All right. Okay. Bye-bye. Take care.
To learn more about Beyond the Bag and the work of Closed Loop Partners, visit closedlooppartners.com and check out the links in our show description. Now to go even deeper into how brands can reimagine retail experiences for a circular economy, we speak with John Atcheson. BBMG had the pleasure of working with John years ago on the branding for the car-sharing company GetAround, and since then he's led a number of startups in the re-commerce space. His newest venture is called Circular Way, and they aim to apply everything he's learned so far to create a frictionless consumer experience that completely redefines our relationship with the stuff in our lives. Here's our interview with John. Hey, John, it is so good to see you and welcome to the Future We Want podcast.
It's great to be here. Thanks for inviting me, Raphael.
You have been on this journey from GetAround, which, had huge success in building a peer-to-peer car sharing model. And then you helped to create Stuffster as the next chapter. Yeah. And really interesting partnerships with the John Lewis retailer in the UK, with Adidas. Can you tell us a little bit about the evolution of your own work and thinking from GetAround to Stuffster? And what was the core idea behind Stuffster? And what did you learn through those early experiments?
Yeah, well, there were a lot of experiments before we ever got to John Lewis and at Adidas. So, the progression from GetAround to Stuffster was really just kind of stepping back. Once GetAround had raised a Series A round, was really starting to grow pretty rapidly, I began looking into all the other things we buy and what happens to those things. And it's, I mean, these statistics, it's really depressing, right? 70% or more of all consumer goods end up in landfill, even though 90-some% of those things are perfectly usable. And the goal of Stuffster from the start was, it was very ambitious and kind of crazy. It was like, how do we fundamentally change this flow? How do we make it into a completely different way that people think about things, behave with things, all of that? Well, let's first off go to where these people are. So let's find a way to team up with the brands and retailers that actually produce and sell these things. And let's create a compelling way for consumers to be able to sell these things back. Because even at that time, there was an increase in resale. It was starting to, obviously eBay was very established at that point, but it was starting to get more kind of broadly adopted. But still a very, very small percentage of what went on. And most of that was due to the fact that it was just incredibly painful. Right? It was a really, really painstaking process of taking pictures and creating listings and dealing with buyer questions and all those kinds of things. And the insight behind Stuffster was, well, look, if we actually partner with the brands, if we get into that flow in some way earlier, where we can get all the information about these products up front, then we can theoretically dramatically simplify that experience. And at that time, it was viewed as an absolutely insane idea that we would ever get any brand or retailer to engage in resale because, and this is, kind of around 2014, 15, the predominant view was still, oh my gosh, that it degrades the brand, it's going to cannibalize sales of new things. We want nothing to do with this. In fact, many brands were actively trying to squash the resale of their items through channels like eBay. But we thought, no, that this is how it needs to be. And from a consumer standpoint, it would be way, way better. So let's see if we can put that in place. And the first few years were actually focused almost entirely on the consumer and how do we actually put that into a form that consumers will adopt. And it was that was a lot of hard lessons because we spent a bunch of time talking with people and getting their input and getting their suggestions about how to go about doing this. And we would then go build these apps that would do that thing. And it was just, it was amazing because we'd give people this app and they go, oh my God, you've done exactly what I asked for. You guys are great. This is so incredible. And then they just put it down and not use it at all. And we're like, well, hey, what's going on? You really like this thing. It's exactly what you asked for. Nothing's happening. What can we change that would make you to start using it? And we finally just, and this is probably around 2017, we finally just stepped back and said, we got to stop assuming that people know what's going to get them to do things. And we've got to just look at this from a holistic standpoint and say, what is the ultimate solution that's going to get people over the hump on this? And it really wasn't that hard to figure that out. It basically is show me what I own, tell me what it's worth, let me push a button, and then pay me instantly and come pick it up for free.
Just that.
That works for people.
Right? Just that. That's all. Yeah. And that is the premise of how you approach the relationship with John Lewis. Is that right?
Sure. Yeah. But the challenge with that is how do you actually make that model work? That's a difficult model. And we kind of figured that out. We thought, hey, if we do things this way and we're working in a kind of more of a closed loop system where we know what we're getting back and all those different aspects, then we think we can actually make this work. And for those who don't know, John Lewis is, if you're in the States, John Lewis is like the UK equivalent of Nordstrom. It's a very high-end, high-touch retailer, very respected across the UK and unique in the sense that it's completely employee-owned. So there are no external investors in the company. And we knew we couldn't do everything they sold because, it's electronics, it's furniture, it's all that. And so we almost randomly chose fashion because we just said, that's easy to move around. It seems to be getting a lot of attention right now. Let's focus on that. And so the pilot was specifically around fashion that you had purchased through John Lewis. And what was unique about the pilot was the message. And the message was, we will buy back anything you've bought from John Lewis as soon as you're done using it, regardless of condition. And so the catchphrase for the pilot was even the old socks. It was anything you'd bought, we were going to buy it back. And we knew from everything we had done with consumers up to that point that there was a fundamental difference between going to people with some kind of contingency versus giving them a holistic approach, that the mind just works in a very, very different way. And if you put it out there as everything you buy, this is what's going to happen to it. We're going to pay you money to bring it back in, and we're going to make that an effortless process. People start to think differently. They start to, they don't hold back on this. They start incorporating that idea. So we did this pilot, and it was, wildly successful. So we knew we were onto something at that point. And that's when we met up with Adidas, and Adidas said, hey, we're actually really, really interested in this, and we would love to do something similar to what you had done with John Lewis. And so we began kind of working with them, and then that grew and grew and grew, and ultimately became this very important thing for them. And we ended up integrating into their app, same basic service, that everything you had purchased, you could see presented to you. There'd be an instant sellback price stamped on every item, and you could just tap the item, and then we would come and pick it up for free and pay you instantly.
Cool.
We had taken just about all the friction you could take out of that process. And we used to joke that, the only thing we weren't doing is carrying the item from the closet to the door to give it to the postman. But we also realized that even if everything was aligned, we couldn't get past about 20% of items sold. That it was like a glass ceiling. And what we realized was that in many cases, really almost in most cases, by the time someone got to us and became aware of us, they'd already thrown these things out or gotten rid of them in some form. It just had not been at all a part of their thinking until suddenly this kind of retrofitted circular solution stared them in the face, and they said, oh, I could do that. And, it was too late in the stream. Yeah. And that was a real eye opener for us. It was just kind of, oh my gosh, this is not going where we thought we would go.
And so here you have worked in, with such intention to remove all friction, literally any potential friction from the process, to make it part of an embedded brand experience. And then you're starting to recognize even the limits of those, I think, wildly successful pilots, is that the consumer mindset and orientation to the brand and the product and the whole model that the brands have designed are out of sync.
Yes.
With the actual aspiration for true circularity. And inside of true circularity, you talked about, it's the greatest potential engine of brand experience and loyalty you could ever dream of. But we have a problem. And the problem, you state, is the law of consumer adoption. Would you mind just explaining a little bit about the law of consumer adoption and what that has meant as you've conceptualized your new venture, Circular Way?
Yeah, well, the law of consumer adoption was something we learned through just hard knocks. It was something we learned from the experiences of Stuffster early on, and just that constant iteration and what people would say and what they would actually then do and or not do. And just all we learned from that experience. And then the basic law of consumer adoption is that the percentage of solution you're presenting people is not proportional to the adoption rate. So if you give people a 50% solution to a problem, you don't get 50% adoption, you get 2% adoption. If you want to get 100% adoption, you've got to provide 100% solution. It's got to be from start to finish, and everything has to be woven together seamlessly, and the whole thing needs to be there. And interestingly, that it's a law that now that I've kind of absorbed it, it almost seems just kind of intuitive that, oh yeah, that makes total sense. But it's really kind of amazing how many efforts don't take that law into account. That there's this expectation that, hey, I'll give people this partial solution, and I'll get I'll get 20, 30% of my customers jumping on board. And that's just not the way people work.
Can you give us a little bit of context to the background of Circular Way? What's the vision for Circular Way? What differentiates it from previous circular pilots and strategies? And most here, like what is the promise that you see through the eyes of a consumer, the way that iTunes changed everything to digital music? What is that paradigm shift going to look like?
Yeah, I mean, I think Circular Way is a manifestation of this reality that we encountered, that there's a difference between where consumers are and where the industry is. And these issues we had in trying to get brands to begin to change what they were doing in ways that mattered. Not just kind of adding something at the end of a process, but injecting things into an existing process that they have perfected and are very, very comfortable with and really don't want to change. So there's that whole aspect. But then there's the consumer aspect. And, you know, I'm not a big believer in consumer education. I mean, there are a lot of people who think that you should really inculcate people with this idea of how this all works. And I don't really believe in that because I don't think consumers really care. What consumers care about is, what does it mean for me? How is this going to serve my needs and my purposes? And from that standpoint, you don't need to educate. You just have to be super clear about what you're proposing and what you're putting in place. You know, for example, as we were doing testing leading up to Circular Way, we found some, you know, unsuspecting, God bless them, retailers that said, hey, we'll let you muck around with our checkout process so you can do some testing. Here are the keys. Go see what you can do. Try this out. And so we did random A/B testing, right? Some customers got to the checkout process and they went through the same old thing they always go through. But then another portion of people got to the checkout process and suddenly they were confronted with this option. And they could pay by credit card or whatever they wanted to pay with, or they were presented with all of their previous purchases, and they could just tap on the things they didn't want anymore. And in real time, the value would then be applied to the purchase. So I could basically get my new thing for free just by saying, I don't actually need these 3 things anymore. And we didn't educate people about circularity. It was just, we were just very clear in whatever you buy here, it's going to show up as something that you can effortlessly click on and trade in real time to purchase something down the road. And it was remarkable. People recalibrated instantly. And they suddenly said, oh, this 40-pound item here actually is only going to cost me about, 20 pounds because I'll only use it for 12 or 18 months. And then I'll just push the button and I'll get that residual value effortlessly. And so it doesn't cost me as much as I thought it did. And so 2 things came out of that. The first was this just astronomical boost in checkout conversion because everything was way less expensive than they thought when they went into the checkout process. Mm-hmm. But the second thing, which was equally important from our standpoint, was that as soon as they left the checkout process, they had every intention of selling that thing back. And this is what we were missing with Adidas and John Lewis, right? That's what we wanted. We wanted to get people to the point where the moment they got possession of something, they took that possession with the intention that they were going to cash in on it down the road. And we didn't have to educate people about that. We didn't have to do anything but be very, very clear because even people who didn't have previous purchases had higher checkout conversion because they knew that what they were buying was going to be, was going to show up and they could get that value back. So that whole experience is very much a part of what went into the design of Circular Way. And so when we talk about, coming into the site and seeing new and used side by side, that's part of it as well. It's the idea that everything is in a flow, everything is going to be used again. It's all a natural process. And then I get to the checkout and I'm given this opportunity to use everything I have as real-time currency. And I'm reinforced with that understanding through the whole life cycle of the product. We are constantly in communication about what the value of those things are and the ability that you can just tap a screen and cash in on that value. And that's all part of the entire, experience. And then, the NFC chips and being able to actually keep the product tied to a digital world is a part of that as well, right? It's keeping people connected to the products and keeping us connected with that customer in an ongoing way so that not only are they informed about that value, but they're able to then interact with and take advantage of that product, whether it's, something material such as needing repair, where you can just tap the product and we know where it is and what it is, and we can just come get it and fix it, to, engaging in things that get people to really be able to think of their products in a more personal, connected kind of way. And we're in a position where we can get visibility into when they're not wearing that as much. And we can then nudge them about, hey, the value is such and such, and you should take advantage of this right now. So it's a holistic system. It brings all those different pieces together so that the customer is in a circular process and mindset from the moment they set foot in the store.
And the very premise, which is so cool, is it helps brands shift their focus from selling more stuff to powering more use. And for the consumer, it's literally reimagining their clothing as currency for future clothing. And that's we don't have that experience that what I currently own is currency toward what I might want next. And that whole system creates an incentive structure that's really exciting, and a choice architecture that's a better choice. It's just more options, more resources, better value. And inside of that engine, you have more customer experience that's brand driven, more loyalty within a customer relationship. And it just seems like a virtuous cycle where more needs are met in more creative ways that allow a brand to deepen its relationship and a consumer to get more value out of what they have and what they want next.
That's right. Yeah. And value is the core proposition here. We don't lead with the sustainability aspects of this. What we communicate is value. It's the ability to be able to get maximum value out of everything you're buying, and really know that you're only going to pay for what you're actually using. And I think, the whole thing about selling more stuff versus, maximizing use of things. That's where the gap exists, because the industry right now is so deeply embedded in a model built, and it's not just the fashion business, it's consumer products in general. Everything is so deeply embedded in the idea of our existence, our growth, everything about our business is built on selling more stuff. That's how it works. And making the transition to something that is built on use and really focusing on how do we maximize the use of every item. And, the value is the byproduct of that. If I, use it and I'm done using it and we want it and we're willing to pay money for it because we know that we can then resell it and put it back into use, and that is our objective. That's our driving, our driving mantra. Then consumers directly benefit from that.
That is like this upward virtuous incentive structure that welcomes everybody into a better way and a circular way of fashion. Yeah. That is thrilling. So you are just at exactly the iTunes moment where the iTunes store is about to go into the market, and the circular way retail store is about to go into the market. And I think you're very clear with the law of consumer adoption that it's actually 100% solution that creates the shift of expectation. And then everything moves quite quickly because folks simply cannot imagine an alternative to the way that you've made possible, which is what happened with digital music and streaming. So we're at that moment. So we are, as you know, the Future We Want podcast. And I would love, in your own version of the future we want, John, how would you complete the sentence, I see a future where?
Well, for me, I see a future where every product made is made in a circular with circular design, to be sold in a circular way, and to be recaptured and maximized. Right. So we get to the point where everything is actually in a circular structure, a circular ecosystem. And that's a big, long view on things, because where we are today is so far from that reality right now. And I think, circular way, to me, I mean, it obviously is very, very much a mission for me, but I think it is the first time that we're really implementing that in a way that can propagate, that can expand. And I think, you made a really great point that once consumers have experienced a fully circular proposition where they bought something and they're able to just effortlessly capture all this residual value of things they aren't using, they're not going to go back. They're not going to shift back to the way things were. I mean, it's interesting when I talk to people, I try to convey this. The only thing that often gets people to really appreciate what I'm trying to say is to look at the one area of consumer products where there is even, some level modicum of circularity, which is, the car business. Not because there was any design around circularity in the car business, but just because the assets are so valuable that it just got driven that way. And, it's the one industry where the dealers make less than half their revenue from selling new stuff. It's really the only example of that. But it's really interesting to think about how would you react if you bought a car from your local Toyota dealer and that car had a problem and you went into the dealer and they said, oh, no, that's your problem. We don't do repairs here. Or you go in to get a new car and they say, oh, hey, you've got to go sell that thing and come back with the cash because we don't do trade-ins. That's not our business. And by the way, we only sell new cars. We don't have any used cars on the lot because that's not us. We don't do that. And instantly everyone says, oh my God, I would never shop at that dealer. But I think that's what's going to happen here because, in a sense, circularity and the various circular enablers that have come into play over the last, just even 3 or 4 years have enabled that model to get down to much, much lower price points, all the way down to fashion. And if it can be done in fashion, it can be done in lots of places.
Amen to that. And I think, the whole premise that you never change things by fighting the existing reality to change something, you build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete. Yeah. That's what happened with iTunes and digital streaming. That's what is the precipice moment of this shift for circularity and for fashion. And I'm thrilled for where you're going with Circular Way. It is such a breakthrough exactly at the moment where the business imperative, the technology enablement, and the sort of external environmental factors become so important to solve together. And you have a vision and a business that is going to make that possible. So, amen, brother. Congratulations on all the work so far. And just know that, we are huge fans and students, really, of what you are leading.
Well, thank you, Raphael. Thank you for having me.
Thanks so much for listening to The Future We Want from BBMG. We've been imagining the possibilities for a circular economy with Kate Daly of Closed Loop Partners and John Atcheson of Circular Way. If you enjoyed this episode, we hope you'll subscribe and spread the word as it helps more folks find the podcast. And if you're interested in learning more, visit bbmg.com for more resources and recommendations from our guests and the BBMG team. The Future We Want is produced by Liz Courtney. Original music and audio production is by Go Destroy Art. See you in the future.